Hello, I'm Elishevah, and today I'll be talking about an important but probably underestimated concept in learning in general, which is autonomy development. So, let me start by asking you how important you consider autonomy development is in learning nowadays, and how much do you think it is actually promoted? I asked myself these questions before starting this research, and I knew autonomy is important. But when I started to pay attention to my classmates and my students, I noticed that it is very easy to say it is important, but actually very difficult to apply in the classroom. So, this whole research was born when I noticed that it was very hard for me and other students to get a certification document, for example. Even when we had taken 2 hours of target language classes, 5 days a week, and other classes related to English teaching for 5 semesters, that would represent time enough to be able to understand how to learn the language, especially in a major that prepares students to become ESL teachers. So, with this problem, I started thinking about the possible reasons why we were not being the proficient learners the school was expecting us to be. And reading about our educational program and the learning theories behind it, I found a constructivism that states that learners are supposed to build their own learning, which is an idea closely related to autonomy. Then I asked myself, are we really autonomous? And we carried out this research to find out specifically how much students know about autonomy, their level of autonomy, and according to their own perspectives, what were the factors or are the factors that are involved in autonomy development. So, this brings me to the research questions of this study. So, the first research question is, what do lay students know about autonomy? I started with this question because as I didn't know much about autonomy, I wanted to know if it was the same problem for other students and if it was a factor for not being autonomous or if there was a misconception of this term. Now, for the following research question, I wanted to find out the level of autonomy students had to see if they were autonomous or not, and if there was a relationship with the previous research question. So the question is, to what extent are lay students autonomous in language learning? And finally, the last question, according to lay students' own experience, what are the factors that are involved in autonomy development? Then with these questions, the objective of this research is to find out how much students know about autonomy, their level of autonomy, and the factors that, according to them, are involved in autonomy development. Now, let's talk about the important concepts of this research, the literature review. Well, firstly, we have autonomy, which is the main issue in this study. So, autonomy is a concept that was originally used in the fields of politics and philosophy, with the idea of being independent to make decisions, according to Smith 2008. Then this concept was adopted in learning, and the conception that started the whole discussion of autonomy in learning was given by Henry Hollick, who said that autonomy is the ability to take charge of one's own learning. This means that we need to take responsibility for our own process of learning. Now, autonomy started to make room in the 70s with the Centre Recherche et d'Application Pédagogique en Langue, better known as CRAPEL. That was a project developed by Hollick that had the purpose of offering adults more opportunities to learn a foreign language in self-access centers, which, according to Faltis, were based on the idea that students who managed their own learning had more powerful learning experiences. But later on, it was seen that learners were having problems in setting objectives, in selecting methods and content, and that was a problem to which Krappel reacted by offering counseling to learners, which resulted so much better. Since then, autonomy has been defined by different authors, taking into account different elements. For example, Little, 2004, says that the learner has a certain intention to learn or learn intentionally, and Benson, 2006, claims that the process of autonomy starts with motivation. Moreover, Mendy in 2014 says that it is an activity on the mind, and that means that metacognitive skills are also involved. Moreover, according to Barrantes and Olivares 2013, there are three important metacognitive parts of autonomy, which are planning, monitoring, and evaluating, that at the same time are dividing in setting objectives, in defining contents, selecting methods and techniques, monitoring, and which is the part in which teachers play an important role, and of course evaluating. Now, let's move on to define metacognition. Well, according to Hauke's 2018, metacognition is the awareness of one's knowledge, experiences, emotions, and learning. So it is to recognize our mental processes, but not only that, because Shank and Go 2006 say that it is to choose and use learning strategies. Then it doesn't only apply in recognizing the process, but also using the tools necessary to learn. Now that we know what autonomy is, what is the role of the learners and the teachers? Well, as previously said, autonomy involves responsibility, and that is where the role of the learners start, by making decisions about what to do, as Durden claims, but also to have certain attitudes towards learning. Also, Mendy explains that these decisions should be made with consciousness about how learning works for them and what teachers and schools expect them to do. Now, teachers also have a specific role. First, Huang 2006 says that there should be a negotiation between learners and teachers. Then the responsibility is not only on one side of the process. Besides, Farmer 2006 says that teachers take the responsibility of administrative functions such as curriculum design, goals setting, and also that teachers recommend learners, or should recommend learners, actions that can take in order to improve their learning, and also, of course, provide resources. Moreover, Minard 2010 says that teachers also have to motivate students to support autonomous learning and be a guidance for them. So now that we know what autonomy is and the teachers and the students' role, let's talk about autonomy in our context in Mexico. Well, it was introduced to our country with the self-access centers by CEP and the British Council. However, Hamilton 2013 mentions that there is an important gap between autonomy and its actual practice in this country, basically because our education system has been traditional and has had the teachers as the main actors in the process since forever, and it's not an easy task to change something that has been in a specific way for such a long time. Now, regarding to the methodology, this study is a qualitative research, and it is intended to know students' perspectives about autonomy. So Kotari 2004 claims that this type of study analyzes the factors that motivate people to behave in a particular manner, which is part of our main goal with the study. Now, the participants were students between 19 and 26 years old, and they were in their fourth semester in the English language teaching major at UAP, which means that they had already taken classes related to teaching matters. Now, the purpose of focusing on these students is that as they study English language teaching, they are aware of teaching and learning concepts, something that was considered to be very beneficial for this research. Also, it is important to mention that the educational model and educational program that this major has are based on constructivist ideas. Now, in order to answer the research questions, two instruments were used. Firstly, a questionnaire and then an interview. The questionnaire, instrument A, was divided in three parts, as you can see here. The first part intended to gather general information about the participants, such as their age, And the second asked the participants to write what they considered autonomy is. And the third one measured their level of autonomy with 40 statements that could be answered with a Likert scale, going from never to always. And in this questionnaire, there were statements that reflected autonomy, as you will see here. In this case, if a statement that reflected autonomy was answered with always true, then the participants would show autonomous attitudes. But if in the same statement the student answered never true, then the learner would show dependency. And for the other statements reflecting dependency would be the other way around. Then this test was sent to the participants through Google Documents, and once the results were obtained, they were analyzed and students' answers were categorized in different groups according to their definition and their level of autonomy, following the process of coding. The second instrument was an unstructured interview, and the questions were adapted according to the interview in order to inquire more about the answers they gave in the test, and it was conducted in the native language. This instrument included around 29 questions that were asked to the participants through a video call. And besides this, the questions were related to their motivation to learn the language, awareness of their learning style, their perception about the importance of autonomy, and participation in the classroom to select materials and content. Now, let's talk about the analysis of the results for the questionnaire. Well, the first part of the questionnaire intended to get personal information about the participants, as we mentioned before, and in the second part, students' answers were classified into 4 categories: correct perception of autonomy, vague idea of the concept, misconception of autonomy, and the participant doesn't know. Then in the third part, regarding the level of autonomy, the points that each student got were added depending on the range. They were categorized into high level of autonomy, moderate level of autonomy, and low level of autonomy and dependency. And once the results of the test were obtained, the participants that showed to have reached an intermediate level of autonomy were chosen to be interviewed, and their answers were firstly transcribed, and then a coding process, like in the previous instrument, was used to categorize the information into positive and negative factors that contained the most common elements that were mentioned by all the participants. Now, what did we get with all this information? Let's go to the results. Well, for the first research question, which is, what do LEI students know about autonomy? The results showed that 50% of the participants have a misconception of autonomy, confusing autonomy with terms like independent learning, which, according to Ryan and Desi in 2006, independent learning doesn't necessarily imply having taken a conscious decision to do it, and that differs from autonomy, since autonomy requires consciousness and will to take responsibility of the learning process, as we saw in the 30 of this study. Besides this, it was found that 40% of the participants have a vague idea of autonomy, meaning that they are not fully aware of this concept. And finally, only 10% was able to define autonomy. This means that only 2 students out of 20 were able to provide a good definition of this concept. With these results, it was seen, and it is very clear that there is in fact a problem of awareness and misconception of autonomy among students. Moreover, the information gathered suggested that for the second research question, which is to what extent are LEI students autonomous, we can see that 0% of the participants was considered to be in the emerging level, which was good news. However, 70% of them were categorized in the beginner level. This means that they only have a few autonomous attitudes. Besides this, the rest of the participants, the 30%, were classified in the intermediate level, meaning 6 students out of 20. As you can see in this graphic, any student was considered to be highly autonomous, and these results suggest that there is a gap between 30 awareness and practice of autonomy development in the classroom. Now, the information gathered from the interview was used to provide an answer to the third research question. According to LEI students' own experience, what are the factors that are involved in autonomy development? Here it was found that students' answers were mainly related to 7 themes. The first one is motivation to learn the language. Here it was seen that these participants have a positive motivator to learn the language and that they have a clear objective, as you can see in these examples. Also, it was seen that the attitudes students have towards learning play an important role in learning. For example, the results revealed that they have a positive attitudes towards learning that include will to learn and responsibility to do it, as you can see in these other examples. Another factor is that they recognize the importance they have for the role of the learner. So, for example, here you can see how they recognize their responsibility to find the strategies and techniques that work better for them. However, it was seen that the negative side of this factor is that some of the participants think that their role is limited because there are certain things that, according to their perspective, only the teacher is responsible for. An example of this is regarding materials and what to do in the classroom, which, according to the 30, is something students have to be involved in. Now, in addition to this, they also recognize some of the features of the role of the teachers. For example, some of the participants indicated that they know the teacher should be a facilitator, but they also believe that the teacher is the only one who can decide what to do in the classroom. Now, the next factor that was found is related to materials and activities used in the class that has also a negative side, since students express that they are not provided with many opportunities to participate in the decisions regarding what to do in the classroom or which materials to use or how to evaluate. Moreover, these results suggested that the origin of autonomy is also an important factor in autonomy development, since most of the students who were interviewed indicate that they didn't start to take autonomous attitudes because autonomy was promoted in the classroom, but because they were at a disadvantage in their classes and they had to look for other ways to catch up with their classes. So, as you can see in this participant's answer, that is the case. Finally, it was found that the perception they have of the program makes them believe that they should not focus in other content besides the one that is indicated by the teacher, something that can be considered also a negative factor. Now, what are the conclusions of these results? First, we can see that there is a problem of awareness of autonomy within the students. This can be something that we can fix by promoting autonomy in the classroom in order to help students and teachers to be aware, firstly, of their roles in the learning process. The second one is that regardless of awareness, knowing what autonomy is does not necessarily mean that they are autonomous, since any of the participants that was considered in the intermediate level of autonomy was able to define autonomy. In other words, the awareness of autonomy does not always determine its practice. My next conclusion is that as teachers, it is necessary to reflect about the practice of autonomous principles and its promotion and the opportunities for students to take more responsibility in the decisions taken about content, about materials, and also about assessment. And the last conclusion is that it's necessary to change the origin of autonomy because it shouldn't be the last result for students to catch up with the classes, but it should be a regular and common way in which learning takes place, especially now that students are taking classes at home. Autonomy is not leaving them alone, but also promoting resources and being there, providing the tools that they need to be autonomous and not independent learners, which, as previously explained, is something not very related to autonomy development. So that's it for this study. Thank you very much for your attention.